Okay, so today we're going to talk about messaging your story. As Justine noted, I'm Michelle Sklar, and I head up marketing communications with Innovation UBC. I'm also the chair of the Vancouver Entrepreneurs Forum, so I'm kind of like all startups all the time. This is definitely one of my kind of favorite things to talk about, which is storytelling. And so hopefully as we get into things today, you'll get a chance to see why that definitely lights me up. And then pushing cover that. Oh, I did want to note just a little bit of background. So I'm an entrepreneur, and I've had many startups and early stage companies under my belt. A few have been wonderfully successful, and a few have definitely been massive fails. So I have seen the gamut. I've always worn the hat of marketing and communications and PR and business development and that kind of thing. I'm definitely a people person. But when I haven't been an operator with a company, I've worked for incubators and accelerators, and again, always occupied this role of marketing communications because of storytelling. When I started my first company, which I'm going to date myself, was in the mid-90s. It was a tech company, so it was sort of early days for tech in this market anyways. There was no ecosystem, there was no community, there was absolutely nothing. So we really had to, kind of feel our way around in the dark without any kind of support. So while our company was acquired, the number of mistakes that were made at the time, just not having access to mentors and a network and really good information, I think it really just sort of set me on this course to ensure that no other startup has to go through the same pain that we went through, which is just simply not having access to different resources and to really understanding the value in messaging your story and the kind of feedback that you can get the more times you tell your story. So just to kind of like situate what today's presentation is kind of coming from. So a few learning objectives that you can look at here, but I would have to say that my goal in life, and this is a large part of why Angie actually asked me to deliver this piece of content for the New Ventures BC competition participants, is because it is my life's mission to ensure that every founder knows how to tell a really compelling story. So not only from my own experiences, but of working through incubators, accelerators, all the time I spend with ventures at UBC. And there are phenomenal founders, but struggling to tell that story really just puts you at a disadvantage. So that is my goal, is to ensure that everyone in our local startup ecosystem has really good storytelling skills. So hopefully you will engage me in my life's goal. So, agenda for today, we're going to talk about storytelling and why it's important, and some frameworks to think about how you put your story together. We're going to go through some story building blocks. So really, today's session is about giving you the foundational pieces, the tactics to build your own story. And there's so many different kinds of stories that can be told. So hopefully you'll find ways to apply this in different ways. And then I have a couple of activities that we're going to do. So we are going to kind of break out into some small groups. I know that we have a good group of people online. You're going to have an opportunity to kind of put some of these pieces in practice. We're going to have a little bit of a larger group discussion. And so we'll be able to also get some peer-to-peer feedback, which is also incredibly valuable. One of the best ways to really kind of gauge your storytelling ability is to tell it to somebody that has no idea about what it is that you do. And then you really get a chance to see, kind of how it lands and if people have really digested what you're putting out there. And we'll try to make sure that there's enough time for some more Q&A at the end. So I'm hoping that we will have sort of the last 40 minutes of today's session for these activities. So hopefully you can kind of help me with some timing there, Justine and I for sure. Go over. Okay, so why is storytelling important? Okay, so I think the thing that I really want to kind of ground today's discussion in is that, storytelling is certainly something that's not new. It's been literally around since the dawn of time. There's so many different ways in which stories have been told, over the centuries. There's different ways in which stories are being told today. And I'm sure you're well aware, it's very, very noisy out there. And I would say that certainly, the internet and social media channels and certainly AI has just made it noisier and noisier and noisier. But at the same time, we love stories, we relate to stories, we like good books, we like good movies, we like good television shows, we like plays, we like music, we like lots of different things that are really about stories. So while the stories themselves and the ways in which we tell those stories might not necessarily have changed over time, the thing that does change quite rapidly is the channels and the mechanisms in which we are actually able to tell those stories. So whether you are telling something that is 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 6 pages, 6 paragraphs, whatever the case may be, there's so many stories that we're surrounded by that we love. So the key is, how do you actually kind of stay above the noise to ensure that your story gets told to the best possible way, and that it really does have an impact on the audience that you're telling that story to. So that's kind of how we're setting the tone today. And stories are really rooted in your why. We're going to get into that more, because it's your vision, it's your strategy, it's the origin, the impact of your research or your venture opportunity. It really is the heart of the problem that you're solving. It's also your growth mindset and action. And so what I mean by that is that, the story that you're telling today about kinds of work that you're doing with your venture, the why, the what, the how, the things we're going to be talking about shortly, will always be at the heart of your story, but it is going to evolve. And so the story that you are telling today and the story that you are telling 2 years from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, that's absolutely going to evolve, because you have a growth mindset and your venture is going to evolve. But the things that don't change are the vision and the strategy and what's really at the heart of your story. And that's important to remember, because your why, your vision and strategy always need to be your North Star. And if you haven't had these experiences already, as you get out there and you're talking to customers and you're talking to partners and you're talking to investors and you're getting all this feedback, and people are going to be, why don't you go here? Why don't you do this? And we need this and we need that. And it's very, very easy to all of a sudden feel like you're boiling the ocean to try to make everybody happy. But if you go back to the why, and you go back to your vision and mission, that really is the North Star to ensure that the work that you're doing and the story that you're telling really stays true to what your mission, vision, and values are all about. The other thing that's really important about storytelling is it's not only about your solution, but it's about your team. It's about your stakeholders. You're going to tell your story in a lot of different mediums, and you're going to tell your story to a lot of different audiences. But again, what's never going to change is the why, the thing that really is at the heart of what it is that you do. So the first thing that I'd like to start with is really kind of getting a sense of that brand identity, right? So that's kind of like the heart and soul of, who you are and what it is that you're doing, right? So asking yourself your why, your what, your how, your brand identity, these pieces, that's like the secret sauce to your storytelling. It's the authenticity of who you are and what you're doing. And it really does become the collective personality of your voice and your visual identity, right? And where that becomes important is like the tone and the visuals and things like that you have on your website, or that you have in a case study, or that you have on social media. And so you really want to be extremely mindful of ensuring that the tone and the visuals really reflect the essence of who you are and what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your story. It's also important to understand that your story and the work that you're doing, it is bigger than you. So your brand identity really becomes all of these things wrapped up into one. And that brand identity is your authenticity and it's your credibility. So you may be in the early days of, putting together your marketing plan. You may be in the early days of telling your story, or you may be further along. But the thing that's really important is that authenticity and the integrity of that story, right? So having a story that starts out with, we're the number one at this, or we're the only one that does that, it's hard to really know that that's the verifiable truth. In a population of nearly 8 billion people, somebody out there is possibly doing something similar to what you're doing, which is again why you should take the IP strategy session, because that will definitely help you sort it out there. But it is bigger than you. And so that means that your stories are going to build on the brand narrative that you're creating. And so how you engage with those customers, customer service and customer discovery, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is really, really, really important. Because if you start saying things that are not actually true, if you start saying things where people can kind of poke holes, that's going to question your brand identity. That's going to question your authenticity. And people are just not going to buy what you're selling in the biggest way to the smallest way. So your brand identity really encompasses all of these very, very, very important pieces. Yes, okay. So with all that being said, I like to think of storytelling kind of in two buckets, right? Because how do you start to tell some of these stories? And so there's positioning and there's storytelling. And positioning is how your solution wins at solving the problem for your best fit customer. So really thinking about this, and we're going to get into more of this in the sort of building blocks part of things. But how does your solution win at solving the problem for your best customer fit? And this is important, the best fit part for your customer, right? What is it that you know keeps your customer up at night that your solution is going to solve? So it answers the question of why you, why now? You may be an early stage company. And so again, kind of going back to the brand identity and the authenticity, and all you have is like passion, gumption, hopefully a little bit more than that, but you're starting out with some pretty early stage things that you're doing, right? So how do you convince a potential customer or a potential investor that they should bet on you, right? So positioning really answers that question. And so when I'm thinking about a story or I'm thinking about a key initiative that we're working on, I try to develop 4 to 5 key positioning statements. So what are the 4 or 5 really important things that I want people to know? A data point, the actual problem that I'm solving. How do I know that it's actually a problem? You know, what is my solution? Really, really, really super focused on what that solution is. Do you understand, you know, the size of your market? Do you understand, you know, how you're really going to ensure that customers are, you know, that you know the buying persona? So if you can think about 4 or 5 key statements and start with those, then you can really use that to develop your story. And for every one of those key positioning statements, you probably have lots of things to say. So get super, super clear and be super crisp so that you can create a compelling and concise narrative in order to really articulate well what it is that you do. So that's the positioning. It really is laying the groundwork. So the storytelling has to be grounded mostly in who loves that solution and why. So that's where customer discovery becomes really important. How do you really know that the problem that you're solving is actually a problem? And when you have that customer validation, when you've actually got some feedback from customers, even if it's just in the early days of identifying, you know, product market fit, what could your product actually look like? When you get that feedback from those customers, that's what starts to really bring the story to life. So if you've had a conversation with a potential customer and they've told you, wow, you know, your solution is really awesome because it solves this problem for me, then get super clear to understand that that is the actual problem, right? Customers can care about a lot of different things. You can care about a lot of different things, but what matters most is what your customers care about. And that's where your storytelling really comes to life. And it's building on those key positioning statements. As you build out a pitch presentation for a potential investor, or as you build out a pitch presentation for a potential customer, the key elements of that, the things that your story is really grounded in, those key positioning statements, those are the things that are going to stay the same. But we know that investors care about one thing and customers often care about other things. Customers are going to want to know that your solution is actually going to work and it's really going to solve a problem for them. So they really are wanting that it's that product market fit. Investors care about the overall size of the market opportunity. How do you know that you're not going to be taken out by a competitor? How are you actually going to be making money? Customers don't always care about how you're making money, but investors do. So sometimes it's sort of like, you know, the yin and the yang of kind of, you know, pulling you in different directions as far as the kinds of conversations that you're going to have. So that's why starting with these key positioning statements and then building stories around it can really help you make sure that you're saying the right thing to the right person. Because the last thing that you want to do is have a conversation with a customer about things they really don't care about, or have a conversation with an investor about things that they don't really care about. So that clarity comes down to you and really defining those key positioning elements. Okay, getting into story building blocks. So I've talked about the why, I've talked about vision and mission. So are folks here familiar with the concept of like a BHAG? A BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. So what will the world look like in 10 years when your solution absolutely explodes? What does the world look like with world domination? So that really is your vision and your mission and your why. It's at the heart of what it is that you do. And all of you here may have come towards the building of your business in many different ways. It may be a deeply, deeply personal story. It may be experience that you had working in another company, and maybe the solution that they had wasn't quite right. Nobody listened to your ideas. You think you've got a better way of doing it, and so you've gone out on your own. Or it may be something that you've been researching or somehow had some exposure to. But either way, that why has to be super, super clear. And it should have a personal motivation behind it, right? Because for investors in particular, they invest in people, they invest in teams. So they've really got to see that you are super passionate about that story. And customers need to be see that you're super passionate about that story, because they need to know that you are going to be around, for the long term, right? And if they can really get clarity on how passionate you are about your story, that's the thing that really brings authenticity to your brand and authenticity to the work that you're doing. Your what? Your what is rooted in your values. And your values are really, really important when it comes to how you tell the story, or where you tell the story, or the visuals that you may choose for a presentation, or the kinds of potential customers or investors that you want to work with. You don't have to say yes to everybody. You need to make sure that you're working with the right constituents that are really going to benefit from the work that you're doing. So, for example, you may value collaboration. And so that language and that concept, it really needs to show up across all of your storytelling. You may value, initiative, right? And so that's a value that will likely show up on your website in where you're recruiting for new team members. You may really value, operational excellence, right? And those are the kinds of things that are going to show up in the language that you choose, in the visuals that you choose, and in the places that you want to tell those stories, right? And especially when you are in the early days of building a company, all you kind of have is like your why, your values, and how you're going to do the thing that you're going to do. And that's always going to be the baseline, right? So your how, again, it kind of comes back to the positioning. How are you going to solve this problem? This is not about features. This is about benefits. And that's a very, very important distinction. People don't necessarily care if the thing that you're building is black, white, purple, blue, but they do care that it works. Or they do care that it's at a cost that they can afford. Or they do care that, it's not going to break down, and they're not going to, it's going to be really difficult to sort of, fix a piece of equipment. So the how is really important in how you're actually telling that story. How are you going to solve that problem for them? So getting a little bit more into vision and mission. So why did you start your business? So that kind of comes down to, was it based on a personal experience? Was it placed on, a previous job that you had, or some research that you're doing? But why you started your business, that really is at the heart of what you're doing. And it's, again, that North Star that you're always going to come back to kind of keep you calibrated for moving forward with those conversations with customers and potential investors. It drives that direction and focus, and it motivates you and your team. Building companies, as you probably are well aware of, is the hardest thing you will ever do. It is going to have ups and downs like nobody's business. If you've done sales before or not done sales before, you know how it is. When you get a win with a customer, you're totally on cloud 9. When you get a no, it just feels like you've completely fallen off of a cliff, right? But when you go back to the why, it reminds you of why you're doing the work that you're doing. And I'll also note that when you do actually get a no from a potential customer or a potential investor, that's awesome, because it's a reflection point of, are you actually talking to the right people, right? Are you clear on the problem that your solution is going to actually solve? So that motivation is really important. And it's really important that your team is super clear on that why. You may have the years of experience, you've got the most amount of skin in the game. But as you start to build your team, those people may not have as much skin in the game as you do. So how do you actually create that motivation? It's reminding them of why they're doing this type of work. It's reminding them of why they're here and what that bigger picture is. When I go back to the concept of BHAG, which is that big, hairy, audacious goal, you want to bring people along on that journey. That's really what, your opportunity of building a business is all about. That's what storytelling is all about. Like on the previous slide there, it's bigger than you are. And so you want to bring people along on that journey, and that's going to come from real clarity around your vision and your mission. Your values, going back to that, that's your core belief system, right? It's going to drive your behaviors. It's going to drive your decisions. It's going to help you determine who you choose to hire. It's going to help you determine, is this the right, customer for you? And it's going to help you determine, is this the right investor for you? Not every investor is for you. So really ensuring that you're finding the right kind of partners in everything that you're doing, you're going to be able to navigate those decisions by really having that clarity and reminding yourself of the things that are important to you. It's going to form the basis of your culture because it impacts how you treat your team, how you build your team, and how you treat your customers. If customer service is the number one most important thing to you, which it should be, then you need to be really clear on those values, because losing a customer because they had poor customer service, it's really hard to get them back. Losing a customer because you promised something in a pilot or in how your solution was going to solve their problem and it doesn't, you're going to lose that customer, right? So your values also really need to include authenticity and really only being able to commit to people the things that you know you can actually commit. Because when you go beyond that and it fails, it's really difficult to dial that back. You'll be, kicking yourself in the whatever. And oftentimes it just comes down to the fact that you kind of got distracted from your values and the things that are really important to you. Positioning. So we talked about the value proposition. So I mentioned, the 4 or 5 kind of key positioning statements, and we're going to get into a couple of exercises later. One of which is an elevator pitch, like a 1-minute pitch. And you may have 30 seconds to have a conversation with someone. You may have 10 seconds to have a conversation with someone, or you may be fortunate enough to have that 1 minute, as an entry point to further conversations. So your value proposition is really that one statement that kind of says it all. It's the one thing that covers the why, the what, the how, all of the things that we've talked about, why your solution is going to be that best fit, and really getting super clear on that value proposition, because that's the one thing that we should never change. Whether you are today or you are 5 years or 10 years from now, that value proposition really needs to be the authentic grounding of all of the work that you do. Now, that's not to say that that might not evolve as your company evolves, but the fact is it's the value proposition that really grounds all of your storytelling and all of your interactions with the people that you're going to come in contact with. I mentioned benefits being your key differentiator and not features. So, for example, I often do this session and I'm online and I have my coffee mug, and I have a really big coffee mug that's got like a really solid handle, right? And I don't really care that the coffee mug is, black or pink or white or purple or whatever the case may be. What I care about is it has a really solid handle. So the fact that it has a handle and I don't burn myself, that's a huge benefit. The fact that it is whatever color, that's just a feature. And so in your storytelling, potential customers care a lot less about the features, especially in the beginning. They care a lot more about the benefits. So again, kind of going back to that customer discovery, how well do you really understand the problem that you're trying to sell to your customer? How good of a listener are you in those conversations that you're having, where you're not just like powering through your pitch and just assuming they're going to catch everything, that you're saying, how much you actually listening and getting some of that feedback, because that's going to tell you whether or not the benefits that you're talking about are the benefits that matter. As I mentioned, some customers are going to care about price. Some customers are going to care about efficiency. Some customers are going to care about easy adoption. Some customers are going to care about any number of things. And so that's what matters. And so as we're having conversations with, potential customers, the listening and the feedback that you get from those customers, that's got to be woven back into your story. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit when we kind of talk about story scripting. But the hero of your story is your customer, because that's the entity, that's the person that wins in all of this. And so what's important to that customer really is the thing that starts to breathe life into your story. And it's examples that you can refer to. So you might be in conversation with one customer and you can share, I was speaking to one of our pilot customers the other day, and they said something really interesting. And I'm just curious if you feel the same way. And that's a great way to validate a key positioning or a key benefit that you can then weave into your story. So stories will evolve, they will morph, and they should do so based on the impact that you're having on a customer, right? And so the more of that feedback that you're getting and the more you weave it into your story, the stronger your story gets. Further to that, when you can actually incorporate a customer story. Do you have a question?
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
You said the hero in your story is your customer. Is it the customer that's making the purchase, or is it the customer who's benefited by it? Because sometimes somebody's buying it, but they're not the end beneficiary of it.
That is a great question, and I wouldn't say it's always the easiest answer, but the hero in the story is the person that's winning from your solution. And so that can be both the buyer and the end user. But the main point that I'm going to get to in a little bit is that you are not the hero. The customer is the hero, right? And so when you start really thinking about the customer, the client, the end user as the hero, that's going to kind of weave itself back into your story and how you position all of those benefits. And so ultimately, you want to make sure that you've got clarity, consistency, and accessibility. Yes, question.
Example of value proposition.
Can I give an example of a value proposition? Well, let me think here. This messaging or storytelling workshop is going to help you improve your ability to communicate and have an impact on your customers. We're going to do that by actually performing some interactive workshops and ensuring that when you leave today, you've got the building blocks of your story. So I kind of covered the why, covered the how, and I covered the what and why it matters. And certainly a value proposition is going to be different for any kind of thing that you're doing, but it really should incorporate the why, the what, and the how. So just going back to clarity, consistency, and accessibility. So this becomes really important in the language that you choose. So if you happen to have a very technical solution, it's, rooted in deep research, or, it's some very specific kind of hardware component, or it's some sort of like software that layers on this, that layers on that. That's very, very, very technical language, and you can lose people very easily. And kind of going back to Nav's point of, who's the hero? Is it the buyer or the customer that's actually being impacted? And the reason why it's both is that, and this is going to come up in our elevator pitch, when you're actually presenting your story, if you are talking to somebody who's the buyer, but you're not actually talking to the person that's going to use it, you've got to ensure that that buyer has the ability to communicate your value proposition and the benefit of what it is that you're doing to the actual end user. So that's just one example of why the language that you choose is really important. You also oftentimes only have so much time to share that story. So whether it is 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever the case may be, you have to be very, very, very selective on the words that you're choosing. So if you can imagine that you have a, a very modest bank account, shall we say, how many of those dollars in your bank account are you willing to put towards every word that you're using? So the clarity and consistency becomes really important, because you also need to make sure, whether you're telling the story or your co-founder is telling the story or your head of BD and sales is telling the story, or whatever the case may be, that they're able to tell that story. And so the simpler it is, and the more accessible the language that you're using, and the clearer it is, it means that story will keep its integrity to it, regardless of who it is that's telling that story. So that's why this is really important. It's also important, and while this is sort of a little bit less about positioning, but it is worth noting, that when you are actually putting your story in some kind of presentation format, you want to make sure that the visuals and the language are things that people can really access and grab hold of. So you don't want to have slide decks that are like chock full of like lots and lots and lots of text that it's like really hard to kind of read and pay attention to. You want to make sure that if, the person in the room, walks out the door with one thing only, they can remember that one thing. So that clarity and that consistency and the accessibility around your language is really important, because you need to make sure that the story kind of lives on beyond you actually telling it. Okay, so I like a good quote. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Arlene Dickinson, but authenticity inspires respect because it takes courage to own who you really are. And this comes back to the fact that you don't have to be the number one and you don't have to necessarily be the best, but you have to be really good at the thing that you say you're going to do, because that's what you're going to be measured on. And if you don't have the answers to everything, that's okay as well. You may be having some conversations with investors and they want to know a little bit more about, what your revenue model strategy is going to be. And, you're kind of still working through that. It's okay to say to them, well, we're actually considering two options. We have, a monthly recurring revenue option here, and we have, buy now with, the full amount here. And we're still kind of working through, what the best fit is going to be. So that's just an example of that authenticity and working with the champions, working with investors and working with potential customers to continue to actually build that story. But at the end of the day, you need to have the respect from customers and you need to have the respect from potential investors or other kinds of partners. So that authenticity is important. Own who you are right now. It's okay that you're early stage. They already know that. But what you want to show is that you are adaptable and that you are collaborative and that you really want that customer to be the winner. So getting into some guidelines for creating these positioning statements. So we've talked about brand promise and the importance of credibility. And we're going to get into a little bit more about being targeted, knowing your audience, and painting a picture to really kind of blow their minds and make what you're doing incredibly memorable. And so that's going to be a little bit more about the hook. Okay, so communicating that strong vision and owning it. So that vision needs to show up in that value proposition. That vision needs to, show up on your website. If you're just thinking about, kind of getting a website going, you should have something, whether it's on the homepage or, in your About Us section, that actually has your mission, vision, values. Communicate the things that are important to you, because that's what's going to bring people to you. That's what's going to demonstrate, that you are trustworthy, because the authenticity of your storytelling is all about trust. You're building relationships with people that might not know anything about you. So where do you start? So the authenticity of your story and communicating that message with real, kind of commitment and impact, that's the one thing that you know to be true. So that credibility is incredibly important, and communicating it every chance you get is really important. So it should be on your website. It should, it's a story that you can share on social media. If you're just kind of getting started with some of your marketing strategies, you're like, I don't know what to post on LinkedIn or, YouTube or whatever the case may be. Tell a story about your vision. Tell a story about, the why. What is it that got you going? Because that's the thing that for potential customers and investors that don't have anything else about you to go on, all they've got is the thing that really is your passion and your impact. And so that's got to show up in everything that you're doing, because it's your authenticity and it's going to help you start to build trust in those relationships. Competing on value and not price, right? It may be the case that your solution is a little bit more expensive than your competitors, but if the value of what you're doing is that much better, that's what you're competing on. Again, if your customers care about price, awesome, but they don't always care about price. And even if they do care about price, they might just be thinking about what they're paying now, what they're getting and what they don't like, versus what you can deliver, what they will get, and therefore, of course, there's actually value attached to that. And if you can really communicate the value of what you do and how you're going to solve that problem for them, it doesn't really matter what the price is, because it's the value that they're really looking for. And so why should your customer buy from you? Because you've got a solution that's actually going to solve their pain. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. No.
How do you convey credibility, have a minimum viable product? So you have like the one thing that you built. How do you actually convey that credibility? It's just that one thing.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So that's when you can start telling stories of like your why and how did you actually, build this minimal viable product, and what are the kinds of things you're hoping to accomplish with that minimal viable product. And so I really appreciate your question, because I really want to emphasize there's so many different kinds of stories you can tell. And you don't have to have like the perfect, we've got the total solution and we've got, hundreds of thousands of people using our product. You'll get there. All you've got right now is the thing that you built and how proud you are of having built that and what's really driving that impact and the kinds of engagement that you're looking for from potential customers. So if you do have that minimal viable product, do you have anyone that's testing it out? Are you looking for people to test it out? Ask that question. We've built something really magical. We're at the very beginning of what it is that we're doing. Would love your feedback. Here's how it works. So whether that's something that you are, more broadly posting, or it's coming in a conversation, with a potential customer, you really only have the thing that you built today, but then you have that vision. This is what we've built. This is where we're going. Would love for you to be part of our journey. Knowing your audience. So, I can't say this enough. Are your customers cost conscious? Are they customer service oriented? Do they desire a higher quality of something and therefore they'll pay for it? Do you have a specific demographic in mind? So really knowing your audience and being super targeted is incredibly important. You may have a solution that has a two-sided marketplace. You may have, a client on one side, and then you may have, if it's a marketplace, you may have some kind of user on the other side, right? And so sometimes those can be a little bit complex, but you want to make sure the way in which you're packaging up your story for one side of the marketplace is super clear and it's very consistent. And the way you're packaging up the solution for the other part of your marketplace is equally as important. So two things can be true. You don't have to worry about just having that one statement when you have a two-sided marketplace. And I want to, kind of starting at the bottom here, do you have a specific demographic? Is the solution that you are building going to be for seniors? Is it going to be for families? Is it going to be for business development people? Is it going to be for other software developers? Is it going to be for enterprise? And so getting super clear on who the demographic is that you're targeting. Not only does it line up into the language that you're using, but it also should line up into the visuals that you're using. So if your demographic is, families or senior citizens, then I would not choose black backgrounds and kind of really harsh images, because that's just not going to land very well. On the other hand, if your target market is actually other types of developers or, highly technical individuals, well then, you certainly can think about visuals and images that are going to be like super appropriate for that demographic. And of course, these are things that you can, do all sorts of Google searches or AI searches around, but it's really, really important to ensure that the messaging and the visuals and all those pieces that come together in your story are really targeting a very, very, very specific demographic, because you can lose people if you, have a really dark background and it's hard to read your website, or you have too much text on a, on a slide presentation, or, you are talking to families and the visuals that you have got, nothing to do with like, kids and babies and pets and things that sound like that, right? So when you're thinking about telling your story, and I'm going to get to this part in a moment, you really want to paint that picture. And so knowing who your audience is and being super clear with that audience is going to help you paint that picture. I've talked about this in terms of customers. And again, with regards to investors, and I don't know if folks are also going to Web Summit and you've got a whole bunch of investors that you're hoping to connect with, do your homework. Really make sure that you've got clarity on, what stage did this firm invest in? What vertical did they invest in? Have you gone onto their website and, seen their portfolio of companies, just to kind of get a sense of like, what are they really looking for? So when you package up your story and you're having that conversation, you're able to actually tell them exactly what they want to hear, because you've kind of already done a lot of that background work. Now, that doesn't mean you're not asking questions and getting some feedback and, sort of seeing if they've got anything further to kind of add to your story there, but you absolutely need to start with that clarity around who is it that you're talking to and how are you making sure that your storytelling with all of the things that it includes is actually going to be something that resonates with that individual or that group. The hook. So the hook is the thing. That's the thing that's going to kind of grab people at hello. Could be a statement, could be a statistic that's easy to remember, could be a thought-provoking question. We have an acting coach that works with our companies with the entrepreneurship program at UBC. And I can kind of pick out a pitch that Julie Howgate has trained someone on, like in any given situation. She has a certain style in how she actually coaches people to tell their stories. And one of the things that she does really well that I really love is she encourages people to ask a question. Did you know? Or how many people here have, or something like that, right? And so right away, you can actually capture someone's attention. Again, it's busy. There's a million things going on. They may be coming to a showcase to hear your pitch presentation, but you don't know what's happened in their day before. And they may have had tons of other conversations. They could have had bad conversations. They could have good conversations. You have no idea what's actually happened before they walk in the room to have a conversation with you. So you need a hook. And your hook is not starting out with, you know, who you are and what you do. For one thing, if you've been invited to present at something, they kind of already know that information, right? And you're going to get to talking about your team a little further on in your presentation or in your conversation. So you want to really pack a punch. What's really going to grab their attention and ensure that as you continue to tell that story, you're like reeling them in and reeling them in and reeling them in. So if you've got a really powerful data point about the work that you're doing and the problem that you're solving, or the size of the problem that exists, you should absolutely start with that. If you have a statement that's, you know, super impactful around, you know, a personal experience that you've gone through, or something that's really, you know, motivated your why, that's a great place for you to start. A thought-provoking question, similar to, you know, kind of the statement or data point. It might be something that sounds like, you know, how many people here in the room have had a loved one have to go in for surgery and they experienced complications? And then you'll get, you know, people in the room that kind of, you know, raise their hand or they're really paying attention to. So you also may have a solution that maybe, you know, from the get-go doesn't necessarily feel like it's got a human element to it, that it's not particularly relatable. You need to find something that makes it relatable. And I've got a couple of examples coming up here shortly, but it's not out of the question for you to find something that really aligns with the mindset that you want to get people in, that then really kind of opens the door for you to be telling your story. So that hook is really important. Thank you. So, for example, in our research, we looked at the relationship between climate change and how it shapes our opinion in everyday life. Or what if every single day you had something that was totally nagging at you that you couldn't let go of? Has anyone here ever had that feeling before? Yeah, me too. And this is what I'm doing about it. I'm making sure that everybody in this ecosystem knows how to tell a really great story. So that's an example of, you know, starting out a potential conversation with someone and not having a hook, because really anybody could be saying this statement, anyone could find this statement, and having a hook and really ensuring that you're capturing people's attention in the audience. You want them to feel something. It doesn't really matter what it is that you're building. If what you're building is going to make someone's life that much better, that's the thing that's been nagging at you every day, and that's the problem that you needed to solve. And you can ask people, has anyone here ever had a similar kind of feeling? And once you actually kind of see the nods in the room, you can really tell that people are starting to engage with your story, and then you're kind of off to the races there. I knew that was you was doing that. That's awesome. So painting that picture, right? Really kind of bringing people into the story, bringing people along with the journey. That's what blowing their minds is all about. And that's why leading with human elements is important. So, for example, Dominic is 36 years old. He just celebrated his first wedding anniversary with his wife. They're eager to start a family. They recently bought their first place and they're adjusting to life as new homeowners. He works out 4 times a week and routinely checks with his healthcare provider. So it's kind of a lot of stuff there that maybe, you know, feels a little bit distant and doesn't necessarily feel like it's going to connect with you and kind of draw you in, right? Feels a little bit kind of common. Instead, starting with Dominic's diagnosis of X came as a surprise to him and his family. He was just settling into married life, looking to start the next chapter, and then he was forced to prioritize his health, focus on managing his symptoms, and accepting the reality of now living with X. Bringing those human elements into your story paints that picture. It brings people in. If the problem that you're solving, again, doesn't necessarily feel particularly like the vibe is family friendly, whatever it is that you're solving, think about a day in the life of a customer. And what is the pain that they're going through? And take that, and that's a great way to start that story. And it gives you those human elements. I was talking to a customer the other day, and they told me this like heart-wrenching story. I was talking with a client the other day, and they explained to me that their entire system completely shut down, right? You can bring those human elements and weave them into the story and have people kind of feel like, okay, tell me more. So again, it doesn't matter if the thing that you're building feels like it has an emotional hook to it. You can bring the emotion into that story by making it relatable and really giving the human elements to it. And this is going to take some practice. All of this is going to take some practice, right? And we're going to get into that in a little bit as well. Oops. We're both obviously doing it at the same time. This is the next slide, or did I have one that I missed?
Let me go back for you. I think you covered
Okay,
that.
yeah, next one. Okay, great. So, I mentioned using, kind of data-driven impact. If you've got a data point, like, did you know that 88% of the population is going to have this experience? Did you know that 67% of businesses have this particular experience, right? If you've got a data point that you've come to know based on your own market research and the size of your opportunity, right? You can use data-driven impact. But a statistic like, big round number, 3,000 kilometers might seem like it's hard for your audience to connect with. Instead, the distance between Vancouver and Calgary is about 1,000 kilometers. That means you'd have to drive there and back 3 times to cover this distance. Well, our solution does X, Y, Z, right? So again, thinking about how do you take a really important data point and actually make it make sense for people. And again, this is going to take some practice. And so, as I mentioned at the outset, an opportunity to tell your story to people that don't know anything about what you're doing. And then, kind of coming up with a relatable story and kind of getting some feedback from someone. And they might be like, oh yeah, I understand what you're doing. It makes me think about this, this, and this. Oh yeah, I understand. I kind of feel this and that about it, right? And so you can kind of take some of the feedback that you're getting from the people that you're talking to and weave it into your story. And that's how you kind of build that like authenticity in there. And again, it's going to take practice, but that's why having conversations with customers, potential customers, is so important because there's so much gold in there. Okay. Tactics for great storytelling. So, humor, curiosity, and vulnerability. Now, you might be working on a solution that, doesn't really seem to be that funny, but that's not to say that you can't have, levity in your storytelling. And so, if you are going to be, doing a pitch presentation, it's okay to, kind of get on stage and work out that nervous energy. I don't know how you guys are feeling today, but I'm feeling a little bit nervous, but I'm nervous with excitement and I can't wait to share my story with you today, right? There's lots of ways in which you can bring levity to a situation that's authentic. And really, it just kind of takes the edge off. Takes the edge off of you with the nervous energy. It takes the edge off the person that you're speaking with, right? If you, again, are going to something that, sounds like Web Summit, or you're going to be in a room with like, tons of potential investors, or you're going to some kind of event with tons of potential customers, right? They're already going to think, oh, what is he going to try to sell me? Or I already heard, 20 pitch presentations today. I'm kind of feeling a little bit exhausted. And if you are going to Web Summit, that's going to be a pretty common feeling for most of the people that you're speaking with. So unless you caught someone at, 8:30 in the morning, chances are they've already had, dozens of conversations by the time they get connected with you. So a little bit of levity in the situation could just kind of take the edge off for everyone and kind of bring the audience to you so that they're really listening to your story. Approaching things with curiosity. So, whether you are weaving curiosity into your pitch presentation or you're weaving curiosity into your, conversations with people. And again, it kind of goes back to that kind of customer discovery. You don't have all the answers. You can't possibly have all the answers, especially at this stage. And I'm not sure, even if you were a billion-dollar company, that you would necessarily have all the answers. So always being curious is really important. Always putting yourself out there to learn from the people around you and that are potentially interested in what it is that you're doing means that your story is going to become richer and richer and richer because you're weaving in the feedback and the answers that you're getting from the people that you're actually connecting with, right? Curiosity is also something that could, make its way into a campaign. You can, for example, we're talking about you have a minimal viable product and, maybe you kind of need some feedback. So maybe you've got an email out there to 100 of your, best family and friends, or maybe you put something on LinkedIn, and you're like, I'm just curious. We kind of created something here, love a little bit of feedback. If you can DM me, I'll send you a link, right? Always be curious in the rooms that you enter into, because there's always so much to learn and there's always ways to engage people, right? You want to make sure that you're grounding your story in the things that people really want to know. And so if you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone and you just kind of want to ground the conversation with them, maybe it's starting out with, so, how many presentations have you heard today? Or just curious, what are you doing to solve this particular problem? Or any number of things at all. But when a person that you're talking to gives you a response, it allows you to really hone in that hook and really hone in those key positioning things to what they've already told you is important. And having a little bit of vulnerability, right? We're just starting out with, the very basics of things. And so I'd really love to get your feedback, or, we're working on, really kind of aligning our growth strategy with, our partners, or whatever the case may be. Vulnerability is something that can really establish trust. You are a founder of an early stage company, and so you're just putting yourself out there. You're already vulnerable before the door even opened. And you can really lean into that, and you can really leverage that, and you can really show people that you want to learn, if you want to engage, and you want to grow, right? And if you can show a little bit of vulnerability, it really shows that you're human and that your desire to grow and actually build something spectacular, that you've got that passion in there. So, using emotion in different ways, however you're comfortable, whatever feels appropriate, is really important. The last thing you want to do is, start a presentation and make it seem like you're just like reciting something, or you just memorize something. People will see right through that. So being real, being human about all those things is really important. I've tripped on stage. I've knocked things out of people's hands on stage. I'm a hand talker. My hands are flail. Sometimes I kind of, inadvertently create all sorts of awkward situations. I just lean right into it. Okay. And practice. And I really can't say that enough. Keywords are really important. We talked about, every one of those words costs you $10,000. How much money in the bank do you have to pay for all of those words? So really getting super clear and choosing words with impact, choosing a word that really has a strong impact, choosing a word that is comfortable for you to say, for you to pronounce, and for others to understand, and really ensuring that you're not cluttering up that keyword with a bunch of other stuff. Eye contact is really important when you're actually having conversations with people. They want to know that you're there and you're present. And if that's something that you're working on, my sort of go-to in the sort of years of developing my own public speaking skills is basically just pitching to the mirror, so that I can see my hand gestures and I can see where my eyes go and I can see my facial expressions, right? So pitching in front of the mirror is a great way to really work on your eye contact. Pitching people that don't know anything about your doing is a really great way to actually have that eye contact, especially if you know them. You're just going to feel a little bit less self-conscious. But if you do find yourself pitching in front of a large group of people and you are feeling that nervous energy, lock eyes with someone. Let them know that you're actually connecting, you're having a conversation with them. And you can do that with 1 or 2 or 3 people around the room. It doesn't have to be everybody, right? But if you actually make that connection and you can lock eyes with someone, it shows that you're present and it shows that they're present. And that's a nice way also to just kind of bring the nervous energy down a little bit. You might be feeling like you're going to be losing track of the things you want to say. If you can kind of speak a little bit slower and enunciate all of those words and whatnot, and just kind of take it slow, you'll get there. You'll absolutely get there. And when you're giving a pitch presentation, for example, oftentimes it feels like time is going way faster than it actually is. And I do this to myself all the time. About an hour left of the session, and I think that I'm, already like halfway towards the end of the session. So it can always feel like when you're up telling your story, the time is going very quickly, but it's okay. Take your time, take those pauses, use those words that you've been practicing. That eye contact is really important, and your tone, right? bring some energy to your voice. And again, that might be something that, is brand new for you and you've been working on your whole life. And that's why pitching in front of the mirror is really a great exercise. You could record yourself on your phone. I know many of you with your pitch competition submissions were asked to do a video, and I love those videos. I love those videos because it really allows me to see like the person behind the company. And that's really important because you're building that trust, right? You're kind of in those early days. So the tone that you use when you're actually conveying your story is really important. And if you don't have energy in that tone, you can't possibly expect that anyone that you're speaking to is going to have that energy. So it really does take practice. And if you feel it's something that you really, really know that you need to work on, I would suggest signing up for an acting class and actually getting some experience of doing a lot more public speaking that has nothing to do with your presentation, but just getting super comfortable. And your tone also has a lot to do with the words that you're choosing. And again, your visuals in your PowerPoint presentation. Do you know the audience that you're presenting to? There's lots of crazy things happening in the world today. You want to make sure that you don't have an image out there that, has a meaning that could be very, very offensive for other people in the room. So doing your homework is really important. Ensuring that your visuals, your language, and your tone are really going to be relevant and they're going to resonate with the people in the room. And again, sometimes that's going to shift a little bit and that's okay. And you will find your tone and your visuals and your keywords, you'll find those things over time. So every chance you have to tell a story, use it as an opportunity to get better and better and better and better. And never take it personally if you get a no, and never take it personally if, you forgot words and, the story kind of feels like it's crashing and burning a little bit. Yes.
Recommendations on people who English is their third or like second language.
Mhm.
And like at the moment they forget the word and they're like, they don't want to make a mistake.
That is a really great question, and I'm very glad that you brought that up. That's something that certainly within our, sort of UBC cohorts, we have so many international students that speak a multitude of languages. And so it can be hard sometimes to kind of like remember the, word in the language that you're currently speaking. And it can be very overwhelming. And certainly, across many different languages, words can get very long and, complicated and whatnot. And that's why these keywords are really important, right? Choose words that are simple and that are easy for everybody in the room to understand. If you have I'm not sure if anyone here is in, sort of drug discovery or anything that sounds like that, where there's, really long, complex words and whatnot, don't use that word. Come up with a word that is going to be a really easy way to explain that and not something that's complicated. So yes, if you speak many languages, of which English is one, really ensure that you're choosing words that are easy for you to remember and easy for you to pronounce and are not particularly complicated. Second thing is pace yourself, take time, enunciate. I'm a fast talker. I use my hands. I wouldn't say that these things have always been to my benefit, but I do know that it's something that I do. And I often have to kind of put myself in check and think about slowing down a little bit. I've shared this story, but I have like the mom test. So I've, mentioned my first company was in the mid-90s. So I've been in, technology and innovation for a very, very, very long time. My mom is 83 years old and my brother is also in tech and innovation. And we've been doing these things forever. And my mom has been amazing at keeping up with what it is that we're doing. Why? Because we make sure that when we're telling her the story of what we do, we are very, very, very intentional about choosing words that are super simple and are relatable for where my 83-year-old mom is. The practice is really important. The more you get a chance to kind of work through those words, if you're giving a presentation, maybe you're trying to remember you get on stage and all you know is that there's 5 things you need to make sure that you cover. Even if you've got your hands down here, first thing, 1, get through that. 2, get through that. 3, get through that. You can have lots of different tips and tricks that will help ground you in the way in which you're telling your story to keep it really simple. But take that time and really do pace yourself. And the other thing, there's one other thing I wanted to note. Oh, yes, I wanted to tell you another story. So, one of my one of my careers in my sort of illustrious career trajectory. I worked for a family, my family business, and we had a digital marketing, we had an online news platform. And I would often be giving presentations, or I would be interviewing people, and I would be talking to people where I had absolutely no idea what they did, which is why I became a very good question asker, because I really didn't understand. And that was my way of them not knowing that I didn't understand. I was asked lots of questions. I would often finish a sentence with "if you will." And I didn't really think about it. I was just saying "if you will" at the end of everything. And so my team would sit at the back of the room and they would like hold up these signs for like the number of times that I said "if you will" to really just kind of get me to break that habit. Sometimes we use these fillers of like and on. I'm also absolutely guilty of it. So it really is a practice to take your time enunciating words, ensuring that you don't have too much filler that can become a distraction, and choosing language that's very simple, and then practice, practice, practice. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, excellent. So, storytelling. It's an invitation for someone to participate in something bigger than themselves and in something they believe in. Positioning. Stories that sell require a deep understanding of your customers, and positioning your customer at the center of your brand allows them to win. Take a picture of this one, because at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. People need to feel like they're buying into something that's bigger than themselves and something they believe in. So really getting clear and understanding what they believe in is very important. Making sure that you're putting your customer at the center of all of this is really important, because that's all that matters. So we are hardwired for stories, and this is how we consume those stories. Okay. So messaging objectives. So we've been talking about different audiences, we've been talking about the hook, we've been talking about the value proposition and all the things that are important to us. And I've probably mentioned a little bit of this already. But what is the outcome of the conversation that you want to have with people? Whether it is a pitch presentation, whether it is a social media post, whether it's a conversation that you're having, you're cold calling someone, or you have an appointment, but what is it that you actually want to accomplish with the story that you're telling? And again, investor, customer, partner, government funder, potential person to your team, right? What do you want to accomplish in that conversation? You want to build a connection with that person. You want to ensure that you have clarity in what you're communicating, and you really want those conversions. So we're going to get into kind of some different channels momentarily here, but knowing what you want. Do you want to build a lead list? If you are, connecting with people at Web Summit, do you have a business card, with a QR code or something like that, and they can, join your newsletter list? I mean, you have to have a newsletter just yet, but how are you actually kind of like, bringing those leads in? What kinds of conversations? How far along in that conversation? Have you done some homework ahead of time so you know actually who's going to be at Web Summit, or who's going to be coming to, the New Ventures BC, the mentor day and the sort of evaluation day? Do your homework there so that you could really connect and you could be super clear. And the conversion might be another conversation. It might be an introduction to someone. It could be anything at all. But what do you want your message to actually accomplish with the people that you're communicating with? Thank you. So we've talked about establishing emotional connections, right? In your messaging, how are you connecting with people? We've talked about engaging in authentic conversations. We've talked about that customer alignment. You are their solution. How are you actually connecting with them on that? And we've talked about being a good listener. And so if all you're looking at doing is just building great connections, maybe you're at a networking event, that's awesome. But be super clear, you're just looking to build those connections. Yep. Clarity. So as you're starting to actually have these conversations and tell your story, again, start with that one sentence. If you're doing a pitch, if you're having a one-on-one conversation, get really good at what you want that opening sentence to be. Make it super clear, and everything else will kind of fall from that. Making every interaction count. And again, everyone that you're going to be telling your story to, really be curious, really ensure that you are absorbing the feedback or the reactions, or you're watching their body language, any of those kinds of things there, so that you know that you are actually, connecting and that your story is landing well. An exercise we're gonna do shortly around the elevator pitch. Basically, you're gonna present for 1 minute, and you're gonna have someone present back to you, and it's a little bit of a reflective exercise. So are you ensuring that you are super clear in what you're communicating to people so that they can literally repeat it back to you, right? And again, you might be having a conversation with someone and they need to go back and they need to talk to their executive team, or they need to talk to, whoever it is that's gonna make those decisions. So the clearer you are, the more likely they're gonna be able to carry on that conversation and really understand what they're communicating to the person that they have to share your story with. And of course, we've talked about being consistent and accessible with your language. This is really, really, really important. So, when you go home tonight, it's gonna be an opportunity for you to really kind of like put down on paper the language that you're using to tell your story, and really thinking about, are those words complex? Do they have dual meaning? Am I losing people here? Am I tripping over the words? Whatever the case may be, but you really want to ensure that you're consistent and accessible with your language. And of course, conversions, which we're all here for. So are you just looking to build awareness around what it is you're doing? And so social media is a great way to actually build awareness around what you're doing. So you're going to choose an element of your story, and maybe you're just going to talk about your why this is important to you, something new that you've got going on, and just kind of really getting people to become aware that you're out there doing the thing that you're doing. And that's it. You don't have to offer them anymore. You're just building some awareness. And that honestly is what social media is all about. When you're telling your story on social media, it really is about building that awareness around your brand. Are you looking to actually fill your marketing funnel? You're trying to now build a bit of a community around you. So I mentioned, do you have a business card with a QR code on it that goes to your website that has a form that ask people to put in their email address and name, and that they will be on your newsletter list to keep up to date with all the awesome things that you're doing. Like, that's a great way to fill that marketing funnel. If you have not even thought about doing a newsletter just yet, that is also okay, because generating that lead list and then getting ready to communicate to people, those two things don't have to happen at the same time. But once you actually start to build that funnel, there's so many stories that you can be telling. You can talk about new hires, you can talk about wins on things, you can talk about reflections that you're having, you can have all sorts of really great stories that you're communicating to people. So you're building that community around you, and you want to build a community of champions. I was on a Vancouver Startup Week panel, and the question was around, what is I think the question was around, like, what is one of the more, what is your favorite marketing channel, or what is sort of an undervalued, marketing channel of all the things out there? What's the one thing that's really stayed tried and true? And my answer, email marketing. And the reason being is because from a social media perspective, there's like a new channel or something, like, every week. I don't even know what happened to Snapchat anymore. And I still haven't quite figured out TikTok. And I definitely like LinkedIn, but even that's becoming a lot lately. And the thing with social media is that people are going to see your message just for a moment, and then it's gone, they're on to other things, or, the page updates, or whatever the case may be. So social media is great for the things that it is great for, but it's not really creating a lasting relationship. And it's certainly not going to ensure that your story has a lasting relationship. So when you think about what does, email marketing does. Why? They've signed up, they've told you that they're interested. You can actually look from an analytics perspective. Did they click? Did they open? Did they bounce? What happened? How are people actually, feeling about your story, consuming that actual content? So the analytics are great, but they're telling you that they're interested, right? And then that really gives you something to continue to tell your story with. If you're really diving into marketing, you might be thinking about a drip marketing campaign. So someone, signs up, they put their email address into, your database, and you've got a series of like 2 or 3 emails that might be going out over the course of a couple of weeks. And the first one might be, I'd like to introduce myself and my team. This is what's really important to us. The second thing might be, this is why we started building the thing that we're doing. The third might be, here's a demo, we'd love for you to download it, whatever the case may be, right? But building that community around you with your story and building that marketing funnel, there's lots of different ways to do that. Email marketing is an important. That lead generation going into your sales pipeline, again, that's what your email marketing is for. But you also may have things on your website such as, or you could even do this in a social media campaign, asking people to sign up for something, and when they do that, they will get, a downloadable PDF, and maybe it has, the top 10 things that can solve, a problem, and that way you're kind of bringing the thought leadership piece out in what it is that you're doing. You can be selling things in lots of different ways, right? And oftentimes it's if you can give people some information that they find really valuable, then they want to come back for more and more and more. So your story and kind of that lead generation side of things is building that pipeline. So can you present some thought leadership? It's going to be something that's really valuable for that person, and then they're going to want to come back for more. But always, always, always have a call to action at CTA. What do you want people to do once they've heard your story? Do you want them to follow you on a social media account? Do you want them to sign up for an email, visit your website? Do you want them to come and speak to you after you've made a presentation and learn more about what you're doing? Or maybe you've got, a sample of a product or something that they can kind of touch and feel and, is really multidimensional, right? But always in your story, invite people to do something next. What do you want them to do next? How do you want them to engage with you, right? And that way you can kind of continue your storytelling in so many different ways. But that call to action in all of these forms is incredibly important. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about these different kind of channels and activities: sales pitches, websites, blogs, news announcements, social media, investor pitches, job descriptions. Your story is going to show up in a lot of different ways. For me, I like to leverage my blog post for all different ways in which my story can kind of get out into the world. Because the blog on my website is going to be sort of the long form, like full content piece on what it is that, I want to be talking to people about. And then I will take a snippet of that and I'll put it on social media. Or I will take a snippet of that and I'll put it in my newsletter, which then links to the blog. Or I've started with social media and I brought people to my website, or whatever the case may be. But you can actually create a really solid story, and then you can use that story. You can package it up in different ways. But again, it really does need to be consistent. And so you want to make sure that when you're kind of creating that story, that you've kind of done a little bit of an audit across all the different places that your story shows up to ensure that it's consistent. For UBC, we have kind of these end of fiscal year, annual big impact numbers of spin outs and money raised and, revenues generated, and then employees, full-time employees, et cetera, et cetera. And whenever I get an update on something, I need to go through all of my marketing assets to make sure that I'm updating things everywhere. That consistency is really important, because you can totally blow holes in your story if you don't have that consistency. So that's just sort of a mental note to do that audit check as you are evolving your story and as you are just, having those wins and accomplishments. And your story will show up in a job description as you're starting to, build up that team. Why should people come and work for you? What is the benefit? And maybe it's not a huge paycheck, and probably if you're a startup, it's not going to be a huge paycheck. But it's going to be about passion. It's going to be about, being able to wear multiple hats. It's going to be about really getting in there and digging and building and making something really amazing. And that's kind of the dream that you want to actually convey to a potential person that's going to be on your team. Again, it kind of goes back to, you want people to buy into that bigger picture and really come along onto that journey. Now I am running out of time. Okay. So we're just about to move into our first exercise, building your story. So every story has a hero. The hero who is the person or entity that stands to gain from your solution. The customer is your hero. You are not the hero. It is often the case, especially if we think about kind of that Silicon Valley culture, where the person will kind of stand up and they're, kind of like glowing and thinking that they are the solution to everything. And a lot of the story is I and me and, et cetera, et cetera. But people aren't really interested in the cult of the personality. They're really interested in actually what's going to help them win. They're busy. They've got a million things on the go. They're constantly putting out fires. They're constantly solving problems. Give them a break and make them feel like the hero. The villain. The villain is the problem that you're solving. Really, what is the problem that you're solving? How do you know that is the problem that should be solved? But either way, the problem is the villain. You always in a story have a hero and a villain. Winning, and of course, the villain is the thing that's making their lives miserable. That is the problem. The roadmap. What's the path to actually solving this problem? What does it look like, step by step? How does a day in the life of your hero going to be impacted when they take out the villain? What does the roadmap actually look like? How are we getting them from here to here? And so that has to do with our pains and gains. Understanding your customers' concerns and really making sure that they can see that there's benefits and that those benefits, they're going to empower your hero. So hero, villain, roadmap, pains, gains. You can make a note of that because if you want to take a picture, you can, because in our exercise that we're going to start here shortly, that is what I'm going to ask you to do, is to identify your hero, your villain, your roadmap, pains, and gains. Okay, so I know we have a bunch of people online, so what I would love to do, because this is all the activities are also going to be based on getting, some peer feedback. This is a safe space. Everybody is here kind of at the same level of wanting to, get really great at telling a story. And if you can get some feedback, or you can kind of like get a sense of what people who have no idea what you do, actually for them to understand what you do, that's a winning situation. So we're starting a bit of a story script here. So I would like you to break out into pairs, and then I would like you to go into groups of 4. And when you're in those groups of 4, we each take a turn at, all I need you to talk about is who's the hero of the story, who's the villain, and I'll go back to the slide in a moment. What's the roadmap? What's the plan? What are the pains and what are the gains? So those 5 things, relatively quickly, is what you need to communicate to your group of 4. You're just gonna kind of go in around in a circle in that group of 4 and actually start building that story script. And then if we have, and then if you can kind of keep that relatively short to like 3 minutes-ish, then ask for some feedback. Did people who you are actually working with in your group, did all that make sense? Was it clear who the hero was? Was it clear, who the villain was? So the feedback, I think, will be super helpful. And then I might ask 1 or 2 of you to kind of share, a little bit about your story script. So I'm going to go back to this slide. And we are going to have, let's see here, 15 minutes for this exercise. So a 20 to 6, we're calling it. So I would love for people to find someone that you don't know, going into 2s, and then find 2 other people that you don't know and go into 4s. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. And I am going to ask a volunteer just to tell me the 5 building blocks of the story. So you can keep it super short, and you don't need to explain the explain kind of thing. I just want to know who the hero, the villain, the roadmap, the pains, and the gains. And I'm gonna start with Nav because I know her.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm here for a different reason, but I decided to use a story from the startup that I'm part of. So the hero is, we've developed a stir stick that can detect different drugs that are spiked in drinks, right? So the hero will be the person that's enjoying that beverage. What is the problem that we're solving? Well, the problem is drink spiking. It's very prevalent, especially in North America. The roadmap, like how are we going to solve that problem? It's the stir stick that we've developed, and our positioning on that is we're not going to leave it to you to protect yourself from it. We're going to distribute it to the vendors, and they're going to put it in every single person's right. My customers' concerns are being able to have a great time out with friends without the worry of their drinks being spiked and then their consent being withdrawn later down the road. The gains, the benefits that the benefits, obviously having a good time out, worry-free, stress-free environment. But I think the bigger gain there is empowering vendors to make it a safe space for their customers versus me trying to keep myself safe.
Awesome.
Many or younger as well, but also older. Yeah. I mean, maybe not this age, older. I used to be young.
You still are young. Yes.
I'm curious, do you know what percentage of drinks are spiked today in North America? It's for my own curiosity.
Sure, with any kind of, so there's data out there,
Yeah.
right? And that's based on reporting. But that's not really necessarily the truth. Right, and so,
It might be a lot
yes,
more than.
yes,
what
so
the
we
data
have to take
says.
a quota number because then people think it's not that big of a problem. Right, because the reality is much, much bigger than what it's actually.
I understand, but I'm just curious what the reality extrapolated 10 times, sure. I'm curious, I'm just genuinely curious.
Okay, we're gonna get to that in just a moment. That is a really good question, and it's gonna feed into exercise number 2. I'm looking for another volunteer. You. Only because I overheard a little bit what you were talking about before. Okay, 5 things.
Oh, it's very hard for me to explain because my language is not good enough. So, but actually, the first one about our business is that we are working on a system.
Who's the hero?
It's that one is patients who suffer from some disease.
Okay, so the hero is a patient suffering from a deadly disease.
Yes.
Okay. The villain, so disease, and what exactly is your solution solving?
For example, diabetes is one of those.
So the villain is diabetes.
Yeah.
And is there a certain thing about diabetes in particular that's like the extra villain of the villain?
Yes, we targeting some proteins through like plant metabolites or medications that are actually driven from like plant-based productions. So that is the.
So the villain is
problem.
diabetes and the solution is plant-based.
Yes,
So addressing that the chemicals and the drugs can not always work or be bad.
yes.
Okay. How are you gonna do that?
Actually, we have different stages. The first stage is like producing plant cells in laboratories. Then we transfer those cells into another system, bioreactors. And after that, we actually extract some metabolites from those cells. And actually, we can produce some medications based on those metabolites, or we actually sell those metabolites to other B2B companies.
Okay, so the concern for the patients with the current, or maybe it's the other doctors, but what is their concern? Like, why don't they just use what they're normally using?
Actually, that medication is plant-based and targets the specific kind of proteins. The product has less side effects.
Okay, so some of their concerns are side effects, and so your solution is actually helping to address the side effects. Okay, so the benefit that's going to empower the patient.
Yeah, they can actually, they can increase their quality of life.
Okay, they can increase their quality of life. Excellent, awesome. See, that wasn't so complicated. That was. Okay, I'm gonna do one more and then, okay, back and we're gonna go another exercise. So,
Okay, I'm working on a website that will help high school students apply to university.
who's the hero?
The hero are the high school students.
Okay, awesome. Who's the villain?
The villain is confusion that is found by high school students when they're trying to apply and finding small hurdles, things like needing to find living or needing to find university rankings or lots of small pieces of data like that, that should really be centralized, but are only found on individual websites, one by one.
So the villain is just like the sort of mess of information and it's harder to understand. Okay, how are you gonna solve that problem? What's the roadmap?
Students come to us as the first step in their journey. All of the information they want by the university is in one place. That's where they start off. They just follow the boring necessities that we get from there.
And what is your customer's concern? Like, why, what's not good enough in the current solution?
It is quite overwhelming for me to go to so many individual websites. That leads to students who have worse applications and who feel less sure about their final decision on where to apply. and perhaps end up applying to less places overall.
Okay, so the game, how are your hero?
We're making their university's process a lot more efficient by being able to have all of the time wasting information finding for one case is gonna take just 30 minutes as opposed to several hours before, so they can spend their time on stuff that's more worthwhile and important for them. As opposed to,
That was great, thank you so much. Okay. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of a test, a taste of what are the 5 key components to telling that story, right? So who stands to gain from the solution? That's all I asked you, right? That's the one thing you need to be super clear of is who stands to gain. The villain, what is the actual problem that you're solving? You can keep that really, really succinct, be super clear. Sometimes it might feel like you're solving a bunch of different problems. Just keep it focused on one. How are you going to solve that problem? What is the pathway? Make it super clear. What is your solution? How is it going to solve that problem? Pains, what are your customers' concerns? Why, what is it that the current solution is just not doing? It's actually going to solve the problem for them. And lastly, what are the benefits? How are you empowering the hero? How does the hero actually win? So those are the building blocks. So now I'm just going to let you do the slide change. Next one. Okay. So are we going to share the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so we'll skip over this. We'll go to the next one. Okay, so now we have about 10-ish minutes left, so we're going to keep this one really short. So feel free to go back into the same groups that you were in. But now what I want you to do, 1-minute elevator pitch. So someone in the group is going to need to time keep. And when the 60 seconds are done, you're done. Then one person, maybe it's the timekeeper, or you can ask for a volunteer, in 1 minute is going to repeat back to you what it is that they've heard. So 1 minute. So the 5 things you just worked on, hero, villain, roadmap, pains, gains. This exercise is to kind of string it all together into a 1-minute presentation. And then the person that's going to repeat it back to you, this is an exercise in reflection. So did you clearly communicate something that someone can clearly communicate back with you? And if they're struggling with that, then you know you've got a little bit more work to do to just sort of polish and simplify that story. But again, this is a safe space. It doesn't need to be perfect. This is just an opportunity to do some practice, but certainly something that you can take home. So you only have 1 minute to pitch. Someone has 1 minute to repeat back. And then if you've got a couple minutes in the group, you can kind of get a little bit of a feedback. I like the way you did this. You gave me a big meaty number. You know, that was a wild statement. You totally drew me in. It's okay to be a little bit dramatic here. So feel free to kind of, you know, be creatively expressive if you so choose. And we're going to do this exercise in something that sounds like 10 minutes. So make sure 1 minute, someone needs to be a timekeeper. You're okay to volunteer?
I'm okay.
Okay, all right. Okay, I want you to stand here so the folks online can also hear you. I'm gonna start my timer in just, you're doing the elevator pitch, just 1 minute pitch. Okay, ready?
Right.
Okay, go.
So my clients are cannabis cultivators, indoor cultivators. And their biggest challenge with smaller facilities is they don't have a consolidated software that integrates all the sensor data that they extract in all their climate control. They don't have a knowledge tracking panel of any sort where they're digitally tracking all of their decision makings over the life of a crop, and they don't have any reporting on the back end. So there's multiple problems that we're solving. One, we're consolidating all the knowledge now into one central software package. All of the multiple vendors that, like different vendors create sensors for different requirements. Irrigation sensors, for example, one vendor, climate sensors from another vendor. So all of this is also being consolidated into one dashboard.
Okay, look at that, you have 14 seconds to spare. Okay, I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to. Who would like to repeat back what they heard? Okay, you.
You're an ERP vendor for all cannabis producers.
Yes.
Cool, it was just like you had to guess what it was that he did, you guessed right, that's awesome. Thank you for being so succinct, that was like literally 11 seconds, so good on you for getting that simple. Any feedback from my friend here on his storytelling?
So my industry background is not that is right.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that it can be seize the opportunity or the problem itself. What is the kind of implication of not having that consolidated data and kind of reporting that you do?
Okay, so what happens in the daily operations for a master grower is they're looking at, like, the irrigation events are strongly aligned with your climate events. When you irrigate regularly, what happens is you're spiking your humidity. So you're monitoring all of these things interactively throughout the day. Depending on, sometimes if different climate triggers will create different nutrient imbalances. So you can take images and put this in as part of your knowledge tracking. Oh, I'm seeing a calcium deficiency in this series of plants. This particular strain is not growing as rapidly as we expected. So they start tracking their daily decision making, because there really is like hundreds of decisions that are made sort of instantaneously with master growers throughout the day in a large facility. So now on the back end, you can break it down on week by week. What metrics have we hit? What milestones do we hit? There isn't a consolidated reporting mechanism on the back end either. So now as well, the other side benefit is GACP compliance, which is compliance for, because medical cannabis is regulated, GACP is good agricultural practices. So if you want to ship and export, you also have to show that climate data as part of your export package. So they also
Can I
consult.
ask you a question?
Yes.
What is the worst possible problem that one of your potential clients will face if they don't use your solution?
The biggest problem that I'm seeing them notice is that they can't verify if they're optimizing their.
Okay, so if I was to think about how I might make that relatable, I might wanna find out from people here, has anyone ever grown anything? Has anyone ever grown anything and then like not been able to keep it alive?
Yes.
Now tell your story.
Okay, so they're not gonna kill any of their plants.
Well, all my point I wanted to illustrate is that, I think it was sort of very clear what you were saying, but I have a little bit of knowledge of your industry, and then did you know absolutely nothing? So if you have a potential investor in the room, they don't necessarily need to be, having invested in cannabis companies, maybe they're agriculture investors, or maybe they're like data sensor investors, right? So taking into consideration that people in the room might not have any background whatsoever, and it's important because you know the thing that you're doing, because you've been living and breathing it like at least your whole life, right? But other people in the room might not know what these things are about. So how do I make it relatable, right? So think about something that, if the worst possible thing that could happen to a potential customer that could like impact them. So are they losing money? Are their plants dying? Are they not knowing how to like manage, to your point, like the impact of climate and, things sort of all of a sudden we have like a heat wave in May, but was that even like a predicted thing, right? So I also say this because there was an ag tech company that we had at UBC, and they were all about like, kind of seed counting and seed sorting and all sorts of things like that. And it was quite technical. It was hard to relate, right? But what they could relate to is that they were helping to make sure that good plants grew healthy. And so they kind of use this. Has anyone here ever grown anything? Yes. Have you managed to keep it alive? No. Okay, well, this is what we do. So you can then extrapolate into the bigger picture. So that's just one example. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I was just gonna add, can you quantify that? Can you quantify the losses? Imagine losing,
Fair enough. The target that we're trying to get is over a 5% production increase. That's our target goal. And so that would qualify as you're adding 2 pounds per month to every cycle. So that means 24 pounds. That translates into about $60,000.
Awesome. That was a really great question, because another approach that you might have is something that sounds the effect of, are you aware that cannabis growers are losing X amount of dollars year over year? I have no idea. Well, the reason why they're losing money year over year is because of XYZ factor. So what we do is we solve that with our solution, and we're actually going to help them increase production, and therefore they're increasing their revenues, and we're helping these businesses thrive. So that was really great, because it kind of give a bit of a different illustration of like, sometimes you might want to kind of bring to the audience a story that really is like relatable to me in my small little world of like, can I grow something and keep it alive? On the other hand, you might kind of think about something of like, what is the massive impact
that's happening in the industry if something goes sideways, and they don't actually have the tools that they need to make it successful, right? So you can kind of use these different examples to really illustrate and then kind of like build up the rest of your story.
Excellent, okay. We are at time. It is 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for being so kind to volunteer. And that's a wrap. So thank you all so much for taking the time to join. And can you skip ahead to the very last slide? I think I've got for sure possibly some contact information there. And feel free to. Oh, I do have some resources on the previous slide. Anyways, this is how you can find me if you want to reach out, if you want to send me a pitch deck for a quick review, I'm happy to do that. Justine is going to share around the slide deck. So all the things that we spoke about are there. There's a couple extra slides with some tips and tricks. There's also some links in there for some other resources. And I wish you all the very best. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at upcoming New Ventures BC opportunities. And hopefully we'll see some of you at Web Summit. So thanks again.
Thank you.